This evening's webinar is all about, as per the invite, unlocking the secrets of how to write a high-impact interview-winning CV. I'm going to cover quite a lot of ground in a relatively short space of time. I'm going to try and keep it to the 1 hour as advertised, and so there will be a lot of information being hurled in your general direction. Just a few administrative bits and pieces. You'll see possibly references to a Matt Craven with the GoToWebinar facilities. Whether you call me Matt or Alistair, which is my real name, I care not. Matt's my boss. We work together. He and I share the load on webinars. It's my turn this evening. So it's my mugshot you can see on screen, the male version, of course. My name's Alistair. But if you see references to Matt and fall into the trap that most people do during these webinars of calling me Matt later on in the session, I will not mind or take offence. But that just explains that slight discrepancy. This evening's event obviously has been arranged and sponsored by CILEx, in effect, and will be based all around that as far as the subject matter is concerned. And I've got details also of another session they're running later in the month, which will be of interest to people specifically about LinkedIn, more of which later. So tonight's all about how to put together an effective CV. And to do that, we're going to cover a number of different subjects, but the underlying theme will be genuinely a handful of really solid tips as to what you can do to make the biggest difference to your CV, and as importantly, how to understand and evaluate and diagnose whether your CV is up to the job right now or not. And so during the course of this evening, I shall draw attention to a number of things that you can do to make those self-diagnostic checks, but also to provide some genuinely high-quality tips in terms of what you should be doing with your CV to make a difference. And the bottom line is whether it does make that difference, whether it gets you in front of people if you're looking for jobs or, now or in the future, and actually gets you noticed for the skills and abilities that you have. So those that have read the invite, there's a few sort of, I suppose, terms that you may class as a bit cliched. Hot skills will be mentioned more than once. Making a business case will be mentioned certainly more than once. And I'll explain each of those as we go through the session. The webinar is one-way audio only, so it doesn't matter how your system's set up. You can't see me, or I hope you can't see me anyway. And I can't hear you or see you. You should just be able to hear me. Consequently, if you've got any questions, what I tend to do is at the end of the session, those that need to disappear because they've got previous commitments are more than welcome to disappear, and I'll let you know when the session's concluded. But those that have asked any questions or you just want to listen to the answers, if you've not asked any questions, more than welcome to stay on, and I'll literally deal with every question in turn so that people have got some value out of the session if you've got some questions or issues you'd like to raise. So tap the question into the facility you have on your GoToWebinar toolbar, and I will, as I say, go through each in turn if there are any questions at the end of the session. Okay, let's crack on and deal with tonight's subject in hand. First of all, just very briefly, I think it's quite important not to blow our own trumpet, although that is a little bit of it in fairness, but to explain who on earth we are, the CV and interview advisors, that is, our relationship with CILEx, and if only to establish some kind of credibility. I think it's really important that you do understand that what I'm about to tell you this evening and the steps that we'll go through are proven in the marketplace. You know, we didn't just wake up one day thinking, wouldn't it be a great idea to talk to people about CVs without actually no real hard evidence to back up our reasoning. So we're a business. We're separate from CILEx, of course. We partner with CILEx and provide advice and guidance on a variety of matters to CILEx members, CV writing being the most popular, closely followed by LinkedIn and how to get your LinkedIn profile working, more of which later. So that's what we do day in, day out. We help people with interview coaching and bits and pieces like that, anything that helps people build their careers. My own background, just so you understand, which I think is important, so you get some sense that I hope I know what I'm talking about. I've worked in corporate life and recruited people in that environment. I've worked as a recruiter. I've reviewed CVs with Matt and his team at this business, and I've written the odd CV as well. The only point I mention that is because I've seen it from most angles you could possibly see it. So how do CVs get used? How do they get processed these days? What makes them work? What makes them not work? As I say, what will be covered this evening we know actually works, and we understand why, importantly, and probably as importantly, we understand what doesn't work in the marketplace. The rest of the team are similar. Some are published authors, which, as you'll see later, is a real talent to have if you have it. Being good with content and being able to write material is really important. This cliche about hot skills, well, every marketplace, legal is no exception, has hot skills. They change and evolve over time. What were hot skills 5, 6 years ago aren't necessarily so now, and some skills are but the mere moment of time. And so it's important to know what they are and what employers are looking for, what excites them, what doesn't excite them, and align your CV and whole message, if you like, to those hot skills in the marketplace. Again, more of which later. Bottom line, a bit aggressive perhaps, but we know we can write CVs that will smash down doors, basically get interviews, and that's the most important thing. There is a fine line between, some people perceive that folk like us must write things that are maybe not quite the truth or over-exaggerated or taking people on an egotistical road trip. It's nothing like that, far from it. Those are wholly ineffective ways of producing a CV. It's all evidence-based, and if there's an audience that should understand that more than any others, it should be people, I guess, who are on this evening. So that's a really, really important fact. It's about taking all the good things you've got in your own sort of personal toolkit and getting that message across more effectively to your target audience. Okay, enough about us. Let's get into the business of good CVs and maybe not so good CVs. As I said up front, there's going to be a few bits and pieces that you should possibly start reflecting on your own documents as they currently stand, or experiences of looking for jobs recently, because you can then start to diagnose how you think your document might work in the marketplace right now. So in the past, and for a lot of people currently still, they look at the CV and construct it as if it was some kind of gigantic, or in some cases not so gigantic, list of things. Now, most people would maybe not argue too much with that and say, well, big deal, yeah, CV is a list of things. But probably not such a good idea if you're going to market with just a list of things about you, your jobs, your qualifications, how people should get hold of you, hobbies, interests, stuff like that, because guess what? Lots of other people out there have lists of things. If it's just a list of stuff, most people share common factors, so you're not differentiating yourself in the marketplace. Just think about anything you've bought recently, almost at any price level, to be honest, but certainly the big ticket items, houses, cars, kitchens, bathrooms. You're highly unlikely to have bought any of those things purely as a result of looking at a list of specs. So if somebody said, you know, here's a nice shiny new car, it's 5 meters long, a couple of meters wide, 1.5 meters tall, and it's got an engine of 2 liters, it's hardly going to enthuse you into rushing down to the showroom or placing your order. So I'm starting to suggest that if you can reflect upon your current CV and it is merely just a list of things with no added value, again more of which later, that's probably not such a good thing. To test that theory, if any of you have ever filled out an employer's application form on the internet, or even a recruiter's, in some cases, application form, and you found yourself struggling to complete the form because they're asking questions that maybe you're starting to think, why are they asking these questions? And they're typically things like, give us an example of when, talk to us about the last time you did such and such a thing, possibly in 500 words or less, or 1,000 characters or less. If you've ever encountered one of those lovely devices and found it challenging, or really wished that you hadn't bothered starting the application process in the first place, or cursed the employer, that's probably indicating there's something wrong with your CV. The reason why employers ask for that information is because it's often the only way they can differentiate between candidates and therefore make decisions on who to interview or who not to interview. Their assumption being, and it's a bit of an indictment, that most people's CVs are wholly inappropriate and don't provide them with the information they're seeking. And if any of you on tonight have actually had to employ people and reviewed any number of CVs, you probably feel the same frustration. They often look very Me Too, often contain very similar information, and sometimes make it very difficult for you as an employer, a recruiter, to be able to make a decision about who to employ into your businesses or practices. So if those situations you find challenging, then that's telling you your CV probably hasn't got the information on it that actually it should have. So again, a bit of self-reflection. The other mistake people often make is that they set up a CV whenever they leave their education, school, college, university, whatever, further professional development, and they stick with a style of CV, and all they do is bolt on their experiences as time rolls by. The business of CV evaluation, what works, what doesn't, those infamous hot skills that I keep talking about, they all change, they all evolve, as I've started to hint at. So if your CV format is pretty much the same as when you left education, particularly if you've got a career of more than 5 to 10 years, that's a bad sign. It's probably meaning that the document's longer than it ought to be. It's probably meaning the document contains information that's not that relevant. It probably means it's less effective in the marketplace, or will be. So our view on this, and as a message of a more positive nature, is that if you're going to be writing a CV, you should be presenting a strong business case as to why somebody should be hiring you, or considering hiring you, at the very least interviewing you. We'll talk a bit more about business case later, but in effect, this goes back to the point I made about buying a product or a service, and if you've been down that route, you'll have been influenced by online material, TV adverts, marketing collateral of various sorts, salespeople, any number of influencing factors, but people trying to add value to the process somehow and give you, either portray a picture, an imagery of something that you're about to buy and all wonderful things it will do for you. But the better advertisements, marketing messages are ones that present a strong business case to you, the individual, or a strong case of some sort. You've got an issue, a problem, something in your life that you need a fix for, a solution for, and the product or service that you're looking at is portrayed as being the appropriate solution. And in a way, you have to view yourselves, whether you like it or not, and some people don't, but I'm afraid it's just the way the market is. You have to view yourself as a product or service to the marketplace. Somebody's got a problem out there. They need to recruit somebody to fix that problem. That much is known. In their mind, they've got a picture about what would be the ideal candidate to fill that position and deliver the solution. And in an ideal world, you would be the person communicating the exact message that the employer is looking to receive. That would be the ideal situation. They have a problem, you're the solution. Everything you're presenting to them is a good answer to that solution. Likely as not, therefore, you get an interview, and obviously if you're good face-to-face and can deal with that set of circumstances as far as the interview is concerned, possibly get a job offer and join a business. So that's, if there's one message, probably the most important message to take away from this evening, it is that you need to see your CV as representing a business case. I hesitate to say advertisement or promotion of an individual, because that's arguably a bit crude and maybe sounds a bit aggressive and salesy, but it's definitely more towards that end of the spectrum than it is just being a list of things that you've done over time. So unsurprisingly, our view is therefore, and a bit of a self-diagnosis of your own CV and situation, is that if you're going to market with just a list, that's not so good. If your CV presents a business case, some reason as to why somebody should be bothered to interview you, let alone hire you, that's a better position to be in. And tonight's all about how to build that business case. One of the other big changes over the last, 10 years particularly, but it just keeps evolving and evolving and evolving, is that many of you will have heard that you need to have keywords or phrases on your CV. I can virtually guarantee if all you've done is build your CV over time, particularly, as I say, if you've got a career of more than 5 to 10 years and you're just adding to your CV each time you get a new job, or new cases or new responsibilities, your CV is probably not containing the kind of words and phrases that people are using to search for these days. So it's not just good enough to turn up with a document and you apply for a job that exists, because once your CV leaves your hands, so to speak, or your computer, inevitably it enters the electronic world and will be searched on. So yes, of course, people will look at it for a particular opportunity that you've applied for, but often there are so many applicants and lots of jobs floating around with a particular recruiter or employer that your document will initially enter into some electronic device, be analysed and then forwarded. And sometimes the selection for people, so you apply for a job, you're not actually judged by a human being. Sometimes that process is completely automated, rightly or wrongly, and the information on your CV is analysed. The system will have been set up to pick up and identify key phrases or words, and those that have got it right will be the ones forwarded to the hiring manager possibly, or the lead recruiter or HR person. Those who got it wrong won't get any further, and then they'll be puzzled as to why nothing happened, despite the fact that they believe they were a strong candidate for the role. It's not always that brutal, but it often is. And so if your CV is not constructed properly and doesn't have the right content, so the other strong message here is the content is vital, absolutely vital, then you're on the back foot. And then the final point in terms of just trying to assess where you are. Now, if you've been in the market recently, the job market, currently in it, you'll probably have some kind of analysis of where you are on this scale. But the acid test for the CV, whatever people tell you, I have to say whatever I would tell you, because it is very subjective arena. But the acid test is, if you apply for, let's say, 10 jobs, as long as they're jobs that you know, hand on heart, you could perform. They might be a stretch, but you could perform them, and you think there's a logical reason as why you should be considered. And you get interviews to 8 or 9 out of those 10 applications, then to be honest, there's not a lot wrong with your CV. And if you've got a track record of achieving that level of success, then to be honest, you could probably go off and go and watch some telly, have an early tea or whatever. There's not a lot we could do to be able to improve on that kind of ratio. Now, most people aren't in that fortunate circumstance, I have to say. So if you're in the not getting any interviews out of the 10 applications, or 1 or 2 or 3 out of the 10, you probably suggest that the CV needs attention. It's very rarely got anything to do with you as an individual, because of course the recruiter and employer are unlikely to know you at this stage. So their judgment is purely on what you've sent them, and they either like or dislike that message. It's got nothing to do with you personally. A lot of people get wrapped up in the emotion of things, but the harsh reality is it's very black and white at this stage. It's, do I like the look of this person from what they've sent me or not? And so a lot of people get rejected at this stage, are puzzled by that rejection, and 99 times out of 100, it's the CV that's let them down. It's the message they've communicated to their target audience that has caused a problem. Now, the difficulty is getting accurate feedback, of course, on why that was. Now, most recruiters won't express an opinion that is to be relied on wholly. Because if your CV is truly awful, I'm afraid it falls to people like me and my colleagues to have to tell folk that, and then we are listened to or abused, depending on the individual's own belief. But the recruiter is highly unlikely to give you that honest feedback. They'll probably tell you things like there were more people suited for the job, there were better individuals, there were stronger individuals, you're overqualified, you're underqualified. All sorts of reasons that sound plausible possibly, but aren't necessarily the truth in our experience. So this is why this acid test is so important. If you're getting a good hit rate of interviews for the applications you make, your message is strong enough, and if you're okay with that kind of hit rate, you can be reasonably well assured your CV is doing all right. But if that ratio has dropped off, is non-existent, or frustrating you because it's not allowing you to get enough interviews to convert them into second interviews, to convert them into job opportunities, or job offers, I should say, it's almost entirely likely to be the CV problem, or the cause of the problem, and that's fixable. Again, in 99.9 times out of 100, that's sortable. For those that aren't in the marketplace and are thinking, well, I don't know whether I'm going to get a hit rate, a successful hit rate or not, well, then you can only start to guess. So if you've answered yes or no to the various questions I've posed already, you'll be able to form some kind of opinion, which will give you a pretty good accurate guide as to whether your document will be successful in the marketplace. So if you're just presenting a list to your target audience, that's a bad sign. If you're using a similar format to when you left school, as far as your CV is concerned, and you're just adding to it over time, that's a bad sign. If you've never really considered the document structure as regards keywords and phrases, that's a bad sign. And if you don't know what the hot skills that employers are looking for in your marketplace, and you find it hard to articulate how you fit those skills, that's a bad sign. And therefore you can probably take a reasonably educated guess that your CV is unlikely to be as successful as it should be. And more importantly, it's not portraying you in the best light. You have a set of abilities. If you're not presenting them well on your CV, that's what's letting you down, not the fact that you don't have the appropriate abilities. So that's probably the most important statistic to either reflect on if you know it, or to imagine if you don't. So let's now talk about and take a look at how to build this strong business case. So I've gone on a bit about you need to build a strong business case to your target audience. How do you actually do that? Well, structurally, I'm going to go through 3 key areas of CV now in a reasonable amount of detail. And if you get these 3 areas right, then it will make the biggest difference to your success for reasons that will become apparent. So we open up most of our CVs, as indeed I guess many of you will. So again, reflect on what you've currently got and try to assess how you stand against the kind of things I'll be talking about. We tend to open up our CVs, and I'll show you shortly a real-life example, and I'm going to show you some content that's focused specifically towards the legal sector. I can't show you a specific legal CV in real life because, of course, we have to be a bit careful about what we show for what people. But I've got a real-life CV so you can see the structure, and I've got some real content that's been anonymized. So we'll show you that. But structurally, we start with this kind of opening statement. Now, many people start on their CV with a variety of things, actually, but many of you probably will have some kind of opening profile statement. Some people call it a profile, a personal profile, a professional profile. It doesn't really matter what you call it, but the content is absolutely critical. And where most people go wrong is they do not follow these next logical steps. Although it seems incredibly basic, surprisingly straightforward, most people don't describe in their opening statement what they actually are. And that's really important for the key reason that you are not, or highly unlikely to be, the only applicant, or in these days, climate, only one of, say, 10 applicants for a job. If you were, you probably wouldn't need to worry too much about focusing on what you are, because the recruiter or employers can be pretty desperate to review anybody's CV that's applied for the job. But in this day and age, there are normally tens, if not hundreds, and in some cases even thousands of applicants for each job, even sometimes at relatively specialist levels, because there's nothing to stop people applying for jobs. So don't assume that everybody applying for a job is actually qualified to do the role. And if you've employed anybody or sought to employ anybody yourselves, you may well have recognized this strange trait that despite the fact you've tried your best to specify exactly who and what should be applying for your jobs, you get a vast variety of people actually applying for the job for a number of reasons, which I shan't go into this evening. So don't assume that you're up against people who are all like-minded and have understood what is required for the job in hand. Consequently, you need to make it very easy for the recruiter or employer to understand exactly what you've got to offer this world, and that starts with the what are you. Come on to that in a short while. That needs to be then swiftly followed up with what on earth is the value that you're offering to that particular business or outfit. It's another bit of a cliche, I'm afraid, value proposition. But that's crudely, if someone's going to sink 25, 35, 55, 75, 95, 150,000 pounds in you every year whilst you're in their employ, what return are you going to provide on that investment? And you need to be giving them a pretty good clue about that pretty quickly on the CV. That then needs to be followed up with a short list. Again, I'll show you an example shortly of what you're particularly good at, things that you know you've got a reasonably strong track record in. And surprise, surprise, hot skills moment again, all of this content's got to be aligned to what those hot skills are in an ideal world. And there are some really important reasons as to why that is. They're hopefully fairly logical, which is that most recruiters and employers, when they set out to spec a job, they will have a set of essential skills that they're looking for, a set of desirable skills which are, there's more flexibility and compromise available within. And you need to get across the message that you fit that template pretty quickly. Why? Because you may have heard of this sort of an urban myth, but in this case it is not so much a myth, it's a reality. You've probably got 5 to 20 seconds, 30 if you're lucky, to get across your positive message about your validity as an applicant before somebody makes an initial decision. The more applicants there are for a job, the shorter that time period becomes, the more brutal it becomes, and the recruiter or junior HR person, whoever's doing the filtering, will literally be looking to whittle down the X number of applicants to a much smaller Y number of people to look at in more detail. And if you don't get this opening statement right, most people will fail at the first hurdle and then be incredibly frustrated why they didn't progress further. And truth be told, if there are a lot of applicants, a recruiter won't have a clue as to why you didn't get there. At that moment in time, whatever mood they were in, they decided you weren't relevant to the process and hit the big red button. And sometimes it literally is a big red button or on the screen. If you then ask for feedback, you'll be incredibly lucky to get any feedback because they probably won't remember why they pressed the red button. But at that specific moment in time, something motivated them to exclude you from the process. And of course, what you need to be in the situation is that you're getting people hitting the green button, because as soon as they read their CV, they're thinking, A, valid applicant, B, appropriate skills, C, seem to fit what I'm looking for in my skills matrix, therefore to be taken further forward. So let's take an example. I'm not going to read this verbatim, you can read it for yourselves, but this opening statement, forget about the level this person's at, that's not important. What is important is addresses all of those bullet points I've talked about. So what are they? It's clear. What's their value proposition? Pretty clear. What are they good at? There's a list of things. Are they aligned with hot skills in the marketplace? Well, to be honest, we don't know. We have to assume so because of the job they're applying for. But this is real-life content off an individual CV that we wrote reasonably recently. That's the important thing. Now, at this stage, it's important to mention it doesn't matter what level you are. You could have just graduated, or you could have a career spanning some 25, 30 years. You could be doing any job at any level within any company in any part of the world for anybody anywhere. Hopefully that's giving you a pretty clear indication that anybody can write something like this. It doesn't matter what level you're at. You don't have to be at a high level, a medium level, or a low level. That has no relevance to it. The relevant thing is, what are you? What's your value proposition? What are you good at? And are those things relevant to your target audience? And everybody can write something about that. Again, almost irrespective of whether you've got work experience or not, because if you've just graduated, for example, you can draw on other skills and competencies. So this is the start point in building your business case. It's the top of the CV. We'll show you a real-life example shortly. I just want to deal with one more section before we touch on that. But this is the start point to build your business case. You get this bit right, and it's a big chunk of percentage towards getting an interview, if you wanted to look at it very crudely. It's that big a difference. Now, where do people tend to go wrong? So in a sort of reflective view in terms of considering your own CV, if you've got anything which starts with anything else other than this. So if you've got, for example, education, you're opening up with education, or you're plowing straight into your career history, or if you're talking about yourself and what your objective is your career objective is, i.e. sort of me, all those things are bad. But the worst things are you try and write something like this, some kind of opening statement, but all you're actually talking about is all the wonderful things that you can't possibly prove. So classic examples are enthusiasm, dedication, passion, commitment, strong interpersonal skills, fantastic communication skills, and the all-time classic almost, can work well in a team as well as on my own. or can work as an individual or strongly within a team or any derivation of that. They're hideous, truly hideous. Why? Because you cannot prove them on a CV. And if you can't prove it on a CV, how is the recruiter or employer going to determine whether you should be interviewed or not? And a lot of people say, yeah, but at an interview I'll get all across my message, I'll be able to, but those people very rarely get the interviews. So you don't want to have any behavioural traits, or if you have any behavioural traits, you better be pretty sure you can prove them somehow later on in the CV. CV's job is to get you the interview, to get some kind of discussion or engagement going on. It's not to try and convince people that you'd be great in the job at some future point. Now, going back to the recruiter or hiring manager's matrix of skills, bear in mind that for those essential skills and desirable skills, and again, if you've ever employed anybody, you're probably more familiar with this than others, but alongside that, any decent employer will probably have a sort of a table. And there'll be things that they'll assess via the CV, and there'll be things that they'll assess at interview, and there may be things that they'll assess at second interview or some form of assessment centre or day. Enthusiasm, dedication, personality, ability to work in a team, interpersonal skills, all of that stuff, they will not be looking to assess from the CV. They know damn well you can't assess them from a CV. So trying to put them on your CV is wholly pointless, and hopefully that gets the message across. It's a horrible habit. People fall into it. People see others doing it. Most people see CVs with it on, but it has very little bearing, if any, on actually getting an interview and having a productive discussion about the opportunity at hand. So if there's one thing I'd encourage, other than going away with build a business case as being the message, is then remove all of those behavioural traits from your CV as quickly as possible, because they're not helping your cause. The other difficulty, of course, is it makes you just look a Me Too person again. It's very easy to put on your CV, I'm really enthusiastic, give 110%, work well in the team. Dead easy to say all that stuff, so people tend to say it thinking it's the right thing, but guess what? You get 100 applications and they're all full of all these behavioural traits. How on earth does anybody decide whether you're more or less enthusiastic than somebody else? You can't until you interview people, and I guarantee most of those people aren't going to get an interview, so it will never be assessed, so it's pointless to mention it. So focus on the factual, functional, demonstrable, provable things that add value to your proposition, to your business case, that can be proven on the CV at a later stage, as we shall see, and that build the business case as to why somebody should consider interviewing you. Okay, sermon over. Next section, before we take a look at the real-life example that I keep promising. The comment at the bottom of this slide is really important, actually, and sort of reinforces what I've just been saying and a few other things I've made, points I've made. At first glance, this is the bit in red right at the bottom of the slide. At first glance, it may seem incredibly obvious, but there's an important message lurking behind it, and that is that the vast majority of recruiters and hiring managers make their shortlisting decisions based solely on the contents of your CV. And you might think, well, of course, well, how else are they going to do it? But that is the message. If you are a recruiter or a hiring manager, the arithmetically minded of you will say, well, what's the 8% between 100% and 92%? Well, the 8% is actually people who might know you, people who might stumbled across you through word of mouth. So they won't have seen the CV, but they'll have been encouraged to possibly consider you as an individual for shortlisting, for interviewing. So there are always those small little nuances that nobody can account for, but they are the exception rather than the rule. The vast majority of people are judged purely on the contents of the CV. So if your CV is not portraying a strong positive message about how you can add value to a particular employer, you're unlikely to be as successful as you'd like in getting those interviews. They don't have crystal balls, these recruiters and hiring managers. They have no means of peering into the ether and seeing through the obfuscation that is your CV as it may currently stand, and imagining that actually you're the right candidate because of all the things that you didn't mention, because they can see them in this mystical guidance tool or whatever. It doesn't exist, of course. They can only look at a piece of paper, metaphorically on the screen or in hard copy if they have printed it, and judge you on what you've sent them. And most people send the wrong material and therefore are harshly judged as a consequence. So, second section of the CV, which deals with a couple of areas that I've hinted at already. So remember, we've opened up with a professional summary, executive summary, whatever you want to call it, but an opening statement that said, what are you, what's your value proposition, what are you good at, and ideally aligning those very same topics with what's topical in the market that will appeal to your target audience. You might remember early on I mentioned that keywords and phrases are important. Well, the next thing we put on CVs is an area that helps to build aesthetically a table that just looks nice, is easy to digest. I'll show you some examples shortly of words and phrases that will reflect the skills the employer's looking for, as long as you can prove them, of course. So there's an aesthetic advantage and a sort of reaffirmation that you have the skills in your toolkit that somebody's actually got a value on. But there's the electronic advantage, so the SEO, for those that don't know what that means, search engine optimization. So the SEO side of your CV, the ability for it to be appearing in front of people because of what others have entered into some kind of search engine or database, is also dealt with by having some sort of bullet points, a bit like these. These are just examples, of course. They're not prescriptive, they're just typical examples of what we'd have on the CV. Probably 5 to 7 down the left-hand side, 5 to 7 a balancing number down the right-hand side, and a blend between what you've got in your toolkit and what the employer is actually looking for. Now, sometimes that's easy to assess because the clues are in the advertisement. Sometimes it's not so easy, and you might need help or do a bit of digging to find out what people are really looking for. It's a great area of customizing the CV, so for those that find it frustrating to have to continually refine their CV for particular application, this is a great way of being able to customize your CV at very minimal investment in time and effort, because you just change the bullet points to suit the job application. Caveat, of course, is that you need to be able to prove and demonstrate your ability. You can't just state things and then not prove them, because that will all come out in the wash. So let's take a look at an example CV first of all, before we go any further. So on screen now, you should see the top half of Matt's CV. Now, as I said, Matt's not in the legal profession, so his CV in terms of content obviously positioned at what his strengths are, but for every CV we write, they pretty much follow this kind of format. So it just shows you how it sort of hangs together and is structured. So, you know, we've spent quite a lot of time talking about the CV already, but we've only got down to sort of halfway down page 1. That's not indicative of a night that's going to run into 11:30, but it is indicative of the fact that the first 3 sections are the most important, and you make changes to these areas and it will affect your chances materially. So we've got Matt, he's got an opening summary, he's called it an executive summary. Again, as I stressed, it doesn't really matter what you call it, it's the content that's key. And so you can read it and you can take it from me. It's got what is he, what's his value proposition, what's he good at, and again we have to assume, because we don't know what he'd be applying for, but we have to imagine that it's aligning his skills to what are seen as desirable or essential by his target audience. And then we follow this with these bullet points, which are keywords or phrases, very rarely more than 4 words long, and they would ideally be reflecting what his target audience would be looking for. 2 advantages of that: the reader gets a nice warm fuzzy feeling that they might be onto something, and somebody might actually have bothered to align their offering with the target audience, so there'll be instant relief, I guarantee you, within the recruiter or hiring manager. Second advantage is if somebody's been searching for certain criteria, irrespective of whether they had an application online or not, they might find this CV far more easily than others, because they'll be searching for keywords that are built into this CV, and it's a really useful way of populating the CV with those very same useful phrases. Okay, before I just move on, just a reminder, if you have any questions about anything really to do with the CV, its structure, content, writing, then please, as I say, just enter them into the question facility that you've got on your GoToWebinar toolbar, and I will deal with them at the end of the session. As I say, I will let you know when the session's finished and then when I go into sort of answering mode. Okay, so 2 sections so far. I said early on, for those eagle-eared amongst you, that there were 3 key areas really to focus on, so we've dealt with 2 out of the 3. The third one is particularly for people in your profession, where you have to sort of not so much make a decision, because you'll know which camp you fit into. You might have noticed just on that example I showed you, underneath the bullet pointed area, there was an area called career highlights, which is what I'm going to explain next. But if you're practicing solicitor or whatever, there are some slightly different approaches you can take here, which I'll detail shortly. So for anybody who's doing an administrative, paralegal, facility, or just qualified and starting to do work, is in a support function, then what I'm about to talk about, career highlights, are valid. But if anybody's out there practicing and got that kind of case history behind them, then there's a slightly different approach here. Again, I'll try and explain that in more detail as we progress. But the premise to this, and why it's important, and the third sort of key part of building this business case, is that we've spent some time saying that this is me, this is what I'm about, this is what I've got to offer the world in a constructive manner, not a boastful or egotistical fashion, but in a constructive manner. We spent a bit of time saying, look, I've got this toolkit of skills, and this is what I believe I'm good at. Here's the sort of the words and phrases that you would find familiar. I can back them up here. You know, I've got those kind of abilities. But we've not yet provided much proof or evidence to support them. And I did mention right at the beginning that it's important that you be able to back up these things with evidence. And so we use this career highlight section of the CV to do exactly that. Notice we've still not got anywhere near to saying who you are in terms of your current job and who you work for. And there's some very specific reasons why that is so, which I'll touch on later. When we're talking about career highlights, it is very important that if you're going to be doing this yourself, that you're good at writing content. If you find that difficult, then you might start to think, okay, maybe I need some help with this, because you need to be able to concisely explain things you've been involved with that are materially relevant to your target audience in a nice, concise manner. And if you find that kind of thing difficult, either because you're fairly modest, or because you just don't like having to write about yourself, or you just find it difficult to be able to compartmentalize these things and articulate them well on paper, so to speak, then it probably indicates you need to think of a different way of going about this, more of which later. I explained the sort of a difference between whether you're sort of practicing or not. So for career highlights, for anybody in an administrative backup support function, then career highlights is probably the right words to use. If you're practicing and have got a reasonable number of cases under your belt, so to speak, then notable cases might be better phrase to use. Again, I'll show you some differentiation shortly. And we use a methodology which is, you know, we've not patented this, it exists out in the marketplace, and there are various varieties on a theme, but we use something called STAR to help build up these highlights or notable cases, and STAR means situation, task, actions, result. It's a really nifty way, useful way of being able to deconstruct complex happenings or events and then reconstruct them either on paper, on your CV in other words, concisely and with a nice flow, or if you're very good at it, verbally at interview. So if you ever had one of these competency-based question sessions, STAR is a great methodology to use to deal with those kind of situations and to be able to explain to a third party concisely something that they're interested in to prove your abilities. So let's take a look at an example. So again, I'm not going to read this at length. You can read it yourselves. This would be a career highlight or notable case for a particular CV, and written in the STAR format. And the important thing is just to break down what does STAR mean. So the first sentence of this text on screen is the situation. It's headline, a scene setter, if you like. So obviously we've anonymized it to some degree. So XYZ Limited wanted to insource their legal counsel to reduce costs and enhance legal governance. That is the situation, the background, the scene setter. The next sentence is the task, hired as head of legal, blah, 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 blah. That's the task. That's responsibility resting on the shoulders of the person we're describing, who owns the CV. The majority of the remaining section, are the actions that that individual took to progress the situation. And then the final sentence is the result. And as a consequence of doing what this person did with the responsibilities that they had to fix the situation that they've described, they successfully blah, 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 saving a reasonable amount of money with a substantial benefit resulting from their efforts. So as you read the detail yourself, not that it's necessarily that important. What is important, though, is this is a fairly complex event or happening, but it's been reconstructed in a fairly condensed, concise format, but that still pretty much anybody could read and could get some idea that this person had delivered in an area. So that's a typical example of what we'd put as a career highlight. Now, before showing you on the real-life CV how that sort of works, a few words of caution. Plenty of people have a go at this kind of thing. Some people will have achievements maybe on their CV. Most people tend to call them achievements. One mistake is that people tend to bury them within the chronological order of when they happened. You can escape from that using this kind of approach. So it doesn't matter how old or how long ago the events were. If they're important and they really define your ability to deliver in a particular area and they're worthy of mention, they can be elevated to page 1 status, if you like, one of your career highlights or notable cases, depending on what your situation is. But what people tend to do when they list achievements is they don't actually bury it within the chronological order. So, for example, something that was really important to you and defines what you're capable of doing, but happened 5, 10 years ago, tends to then land up on page 2, 3, 4 of your CV, where it's not really going to do you any favours. The next mistake people make is they pick the wrong examples in the first place. So even if they do get the positioning right and manage to get their strongest achievement, or what they think is their strongest achievement, on page 1, it's not actually that strong for a number of reasons. Simple things. If you have a number of examples of things you're good at, achievements, your first one is, I don't know, 6 lines deep, let's say, for argument's sake. Your second one's 4 lines deep. Your third one's 3 lines deep, or 2 lines deep, and maybe a fourth one, if there was 1 line deep. Actually, what that looks like on paper is somebody who got really excited about the first one, but then lost the will and started to give up as they progressed through the CV. It actually highlights, if not failure, it certainly highlights sort of almost a lack of attention and a lack of importance to the examples they're giving. So you need to be very careful, even with subtle things, like the balance of text you use. Don't give the impression to the reader that you couldn't be bothered with the last 2 examples and you almost just wrote a few words because you thought they were worth explaining, but you couldn't really be bothered, because that's how it will look on paper. Very subtle, but very brutal. So you need to balance your achievements. So if you've got, for example, 3 highlights of your career, they need to look pretty much the same in weight and importance. So surprise, surprise, they tend to occupy on our CVs pretty much the same space. Linked to that, anything you pick as an example should be relevant and targeted to your target. I keep going on about the target audience. It is really important you understand as best you can what's going on in their minds. What are they actually looking for? And that's easier than it sounds, actually. There are lots of clues around, either via company websites, job specs, job ads, old job ads for other parts of the business or company, There are all sorts of ways of gaining that kind of information, LinkedIn, but it's really important you understand what's going on in their mind, because if you just go to market with a number of examples that you think were important in your life, you'd be surprised sometimes how irrelevant they are to your target audience's requirements. And again, that doesn't help your cause. The example I showed you had a reasonably punchy conclusion. You know, we were talking about 150K here, 2 million there, big punchy numbers. Not everybody can make those claims, and that's fine. That's not necessarily something you should be too worried about. A lot of these things are relative. So if you're in a fairly administrative standard function where lots of people do lots of the same things and it's hard to differentiate yourself, don't be overly concerned with that. Normally most people have got things hidden away in their list of achievements which they completely undervalue anyway, and we can help bring those out and make something of them. So normally most people have got something lurking there that's important, but always remember your target audience is a key thing. Your target audience isn't expecting somebody in the administrative function necessarily to be a world changer, but if you're in a practice and you earn fees, you're responsible for generating revenue, managing clients, you do need to have something that substantiates that kind of ability. And so you would expect to have quantifiable, meaningful KPIs linked to your career. When we're working with our clients, it's where we probably spend most of the time and effort, either because people tend to be immodest. A lot of time people forget the good stuff that they've done, or undervalue it. Yeah, it's almost, I virtually guarantee with half of the people we work with, during the conversation to extract all the raw data from them to build their CVs and make a strong business case for them, it's normally they mutter something under their breath, which is almost inconsequential, and you just know you've trodden on a gem. You've just unearthed something really important, and as they explain more about it, so it becomes true. So it's worth spending a lot of time and attention examining what you've got to offer the world, as it were. Okay, let's just have a look at Matt's CV again to show you how this structurally looks. I'm just going to reduce the size of the CV on screen. So what should be appearing now in front of you is the top 3/4 of page 1 of Matt's CV. Now, I reiterate, if you're practicing and you have a number of cases, the career highlights bit would probably be renamed notable cases or some such phraseology, and in there you'd have particular examples of the casework that you've been involved with. So that would be the slight change in those circumstances. But for everybody else, it would be genuinely things in your career which you were keen on talking about because they were eminently relevant to the kind of jobs you were going for in the future, and that were relevant to your target audience desires. Okay, the next section we're going to talk about, I'm just going to sort of preview on Matt's CV because it's quite important. And that is actually now, finally, the bit that most people tend to open up pretty quickly on their CV is where on earth have they been working, and what's their career history or experience. So you'll notice on Matt's CV, it's at the bottom of page 1. It is important it's on page 1, with very few exceptions. There is a lot of evidence to suggest that by defaulting to page 2, some people do that because whoever they're working for they're not particularly proud of, or because they've had to take a backward step in their career and they don't want people to see what level they're currently at because it's not the level they want to aspire to. If any of those things are true, I mean, truth is you can't really avoid that. You know, you can't change what is, and there's a balance between trying to defer what people see and then just realizing that it will all come out in the wash, and if it's that big a deal, people will notice at some stage whether you like it or not. So it is important to try and get the most recent or your current employment onto page 1, but it doesn't have to be towards the top. Now, reality is you, I, and anybody else, we can't legislate for how people are going to read the CV. We design them with a an objective in mind, but we know there are some people who purely judge you on who you're currently or have most recently worked for. We can't change that. They may be the minority, but they do exist. So it's important that we acknowledge that, but it's also important because people do like to see that relatively quickly. What we're presenting here is an argument to say, okay, what you can do is you can present people with a strong argument as to why they should continue reading and should at least give you the fuller of the 30-second window you're likely to get at filtering stage, rather than discount you almost at the first sentence of your CV. Now, whether they come back to any of this content on page 1 at a later stage doesn't really matter, because what we tend to find is that most people are convinced or compelled to do something positive about the individuals during the first few seconds of reading a CV like this. There's enough evidence to support why they should be considered. Whether they read the rest of the CV or not doesn't really matter, and there's a lot of evidence to suggest that people don't. They read the first few parts of page 1, so roughly 50 to 75% of the first page, may glance at the current employer and make their decision. They may genuinely not read any more of it. Quite a lot of evidence to back that up. So let's take a look at the career history and how that should be structured, because this is actually quite important. It is all about the structure and the information you provide, because it's still helping to build a business case. I've mentioned now 3 sections, so the opening summary, the bullet point area, and the career highlights or notable cases. Those 3 areas are the key. They're the real engine behind making a big difference to your current CV, being effective in the marketplace. The career history goes on to support it. It's still important and critically important in the sense that, of course, you need to explain what on earth you've been up to in your time. Most people tend to get the reverse chronological bit right. We still see a few CVs who, say their first job was in 1972, and then they did this, and then they did that, and that's almost, unfortunately, a curse on your likelihood to progress any further. So it is important to start with the current or most recent employment and then work backwards. As I've mentioned, it's important to start that on page 1, although it doesn't have to be near the top. And then it's important to provide a little bit of evidence about what on earth you've been up to. This doesn't need to take too much space. Again, I'll show you some examples and how Matt's done it on his CV later, but we recommend providing a bit of a description about who on earth your employer is. Even if you work in a big firm, there are lots of divisions and subsections and sister companies and this and that and the other to big companies. It's good to explain to people how you fit in, what your employer is all about, the size, the scale, the scope, possibly the location if that were relevant. If you work for a smaller company, without a big brand image, who possibly nobody else will ever have heard of, equally important to set the scene, to explain a little bit about the context in which you've been working. Supplement that with a bit about your role, how you fit into any team, so who you report into, have you got any reports, who's around you, a bit about duties and responsibilities, but I stress a bit. You do not want to be dumping your job description into your CV, which still quite a few people do. Duties and responsibilities are not differentiating, or very rarely are, so lots of people in a function will have very similar duties and responsibilities by definition. So just repeating that on your CV is not building a business case. It's not actually differentiating you from anybody else. It just looks like you couldn't be bothered. What you need to do is, yes, provide a little bit of background as to why you're being paid to do the job you're being paid to do, but you need to balance that with achievements, or again, in practicing individuals, more about actual cases they've been involved with. That's really important because it starts to differentiate. So with the duties and responsibilities you had as an individual, what did you actually do with them? That's the differentiator. Most people don't go enough on the achievements. Rarely, but sometimes it can be a good reason. You want to explain why you maybe left a business. That's very sensitive, and also it's bespoke. It is unique to the individual, of course. You don't want to be mentioning negative things. So if redundancy features heavily on your CV, that's not a good message. Whatever the story behind it, it's not a good message to send. However, if you got promoted from role to role, or from a company to a sister company, or headhunted by previous boss, there can be positive reasons. They might be worth mentioning. Don't put, some people still put left for better prospects, left for better money. That's really not very helpful. Here's a couple of examples that just help give a little bit of explanation to somebody's sort of notable cases, achievements. Again, I won't read them, you can read them for yourself. But that might be the meat on the bone. So it's specific information about real life circumstances where somebody's played a part. So yeah, their duties and responsibilities would have been very similar to anybody else within a similar role. But actually here's some real life size, scope, scale examples of something that somebody's done, which helps explain to the target audience what this person's been up to and what they're used to and what they're capable of. Okay, a little bit of a pause, unfortunately not so much for me, but more for you. Again, I call it a moment of reflection. What do I mean? Well, by now, hopefully, you're starting to get a picture about whether your CV is a problem or not. Now, as I stressed earlier on, because we're almost at the end now, if you're getting interviews you deserve, and you're meeting that acid test, or you're getting a good hit rate, then that's a good indicator. You ought not to be too worried. Just be wary, of course, that if you start to maybe look for the next job or to move up a level, you need to remember always to position the CV to your target audience. If you're building a business case for your CV and you'll now have a reasonable idea, or hopefully a better idea than you did an hour or so ago, that you could probably spot whether it's building a business case to your target audience or not. But that's a question you need to ask yourself. It will help you understand whether you need to take any action. And importantly, has your CV got real life demonstrable evidence on it to prove your capabilities for the skills that your next employer might be seeking? Now, depending on the answers to those questions is then helping you to decide whether you need to do anything at all. So lots of interviews, lots of interest, probably don't need to take any action. If you're not getting the interest, you probably do need to take some action, and then you've probably got two options. Arguably, you've got three options. You could, for some strange reason, decide to do nothing at all, which would be odd and strange. First option is, hopefully as a result of this evening's efforts, you probably could have a reasonable stab at sorting something out yourself. Second option is you get somebody to help you. Now, we'd rather like you to choose us if that's the path you choose to choose and to walk down, more of which later. We're going to talk a little bit more about some of the final bits of the CV very briefly, but if that second option, i.e. get somebody to help you, is of interest, then one of the things that CILEx are keen for us to do is offer their membership some very attractive rates and discounts off our normal services. So if you're starting to think, well, maybe this is something I need to sort and it's something I'm prepared to pay somebody to do because I'm afraid it does cost money, then hang around and I'll explain how you might be able to benefit from those discounts on our services. Now, very briefly, to wrap this up, we have talked so far about pretty much the current, so what you've got to offer the world, where are your skills, where's the proof to back it up. Again, it doesn't really matter where that history is coming from. It could be ancient, it could be modern, as long as it's relevant. That's the most important thing. We talked about the career history so far as the most recent or current job, but then what about earlier career? For people who've got a reasonable length of career, how far back should you detail? Where should you draw the line? And it does vary from person to person, in fairness, but broadly, as we'll see on Matt's CV shortly, we draw the line in detailed terms roughly about 8 to 10 years going backwards, or 4 jobs worth, depending on the individual circumstances. The argument therefore being you don't want to be detailing what happened in the 1990s now, for example, or even some of the noughties, and certainly not the 80s or the 70s or before. It is of no material benefit to getting an interview. In fact, it probably could harm your chances, unfortunately. So what do? Well, you can't not mention it. I mean, you're not obliged to put everything on your CV, in fairness. If you've got a particularly long career, you're not obliged to have to detail everything or even account for it all. Our recommendation is you do normally account for the time, but how much detail is something we have quite a strong view on, and that is anything older than roughly 8 to 10 years, you abbreviate dramatically. It literally is from this date to that date, it was this employer doing this job, end of. Show you an example shortly. Interesting thought, having just mentioned that there is an option to get your CV professionally written, and there are lots of people out there doing this kind of a thing. There are varying standards, I hasten to add. We would like to think we're at the upper end of the echelons, but you could say, oh, I'm bound to say that anyway. But there is an interesting dynamic, and that is the one unarguable fact is that more and more people are getting their CVs sorted somehow. Now, they're either fixing it themselves or they're getting somebody to fix it, but more and more people are doing that. They are your competition at the end of the day. They are people who are going to market, hopefully, with a stronger message. And that ought not to be ignored. It is an important factor that we've noticed shift, particularly, interestingly, during times of economic hardship. Some people open up their CV with education, as I hinted at earlier. Not a good thing to do, even if you've got reasonably good qualifications. Most people will find competition, and most people will find applicants have similar level of qualifications to go to market with. So it's not as a differentiating thing as some people might think, unless you've got an absolutely interstellar level of qualifications, be they professional or academic. If you're right at the top end, though, there are different ways of expressing that on the CV that don't require listing everything on the first page. So normally we put this information towards the back of the CV. Yes, we detail it. Yes, that includes academic, professional, any in-courses, any in-employment training courses or development, but not dated for a number of reasons. Dates can work for you or against you. You'll not know which. Best not to mention them. What's important is the level of ability that you have. Personal details. Again, those who've spotted it on Matt's CV will have noticed that on the top of his CV, page 1, all there was his name and 2 contact numbers, or contact number and email, I forget now. I think it's 2 contact numbers. Nothing to do with address or where he lives, and that's quite important. We generally feel that, and it's borne out by evidence, that if you mention where you live and give away the location, then unfortunately people can differentiate you for negative reasons, and again, you'll never know about it. So if you live in, strange example maybe, but you live in Cornwall, you apply for a job in Glasgow, there's no mention about relocation, but you've got an aunt in Glasgow and you'd like to go and live near her or with her or in a flat or something, there's a reason why you want to go to Glasgow, but you probably wouldn't explain that on the CV. It wouldn't be normal. Your covering letter, if you sent one, might get detached. So the employer or recruiter looks at your CV and thinks, why is this person applying for a job in Glasgow when they're basically called, we're not paying relocation, we're not offering relocation, so I'm not interested. It does happen. So if that were your circumstance, or anything close to, don't volunteer those facts so soon on your CV. Don't let that become a differentiator for the wrong reasons. It's certainly not going to get you any interviews any better than by providing a stronger business case. So we put the personal details towards the back of the CV, with the exception, of course, of name and how to get hold of you. Other bits and pieces you can see on screen that should perhaps be mentioned if you have them. Some of them are very specialist. Some people work in very secure or unusual environments. If that requires some kind of level of clearance or ability, needs to be mentioned. You could mention mobility in the sense that you were prepared to relocate or you were able to live in 2 places. That might be worth mentioning on the CV. Languages, of course, if you have them, and eligibility to work in any part of the world if you were looking to move. is very important. A few just quick notes on the style of CVs and some urban myths. You probably hadn't had a chance to read Matt's CV in any detail, but hopefully you'll have gathered we have quite a tight writing style. There's no mention of the word Matt other than on his CV at the top with his name. He doesn't say Matt did this, Matt did that, or I did this, I did that. That's really important. We write in the active tense, the third person. That's the way of writing CVs. The urban myth is how long should a CV be, and a lot of people say, oh, it's got to be 2 pages. Unless you're specifically asked to submit information within a certain page length, there's no evidence to suggest that 3 pages works any less well than 2 or 4 within reason. 4 is probably about the limit, I guess. But nobody's ever come back to us and said, you're a bunch of so-and-sos, you've equipped me with a 3-page CV and now I'm unemployable. It just doesn't happen. What people don't like is bad content, and to try and restrict bad content, they sometimes give the impression that they'd like less pages because it's less work for them to do. But a good CV on 3 pages has never harmed anybody. Finally, in the sense of another trait that people tend to put on their CV, so again, moment of self-reflection, if you've got any references on your CV, i.e. a name and address and a phone number, or the words references available on request, I would urge you to remove them and replace them with something more productive. Mentioning that is wholly unproductive in the sense it's taking up a little bit of space. It's a meaningless message. If people want references, they'll ask for them. Whether you're offering them or not doesn't make any difference. It's not going to make a difference to whether you get an interview or not. If, though, you've got any recommendations, be they from LinkedIn, which is where we tend to pinch a lot of ours these days for our clients, or testimonial evidence from previous appraisals, emails, notes, that's far more productive. I'll show you an example shortly on Matt's CV. Let me just show you that briefly before I wrap up in terms of what we're doing. So I'm just going to put page 2 of Matt's, sorry, the bottom of page 1 and the beginning of page 2 of Matt's CV on screen. And so you'll see the career history bit that we talked about. Who does he work for? What's his role? The dates. A little bit of explanation. Who on earth are the CVAI group? What his role is, how he fits in, team he's got working for him. Then towards the top third of about third way down, sorry, I should say, about third way down page 2, key achievements / assignments. Now, for those in practice, we'd probably put over and above any that have been mentioned on page 1 in that sort of career highlights area / notable cases. Same approach here. So key achievements and key achievements for people with administrative support roles and key notable cases or some such phrase for people in practice where you can describe actual cases that you've been involved with. Quite a lot of detail you'll notice for current role because it occupied a fair chunk of time and it's the most relevant piece of Matt's experience. Bottom of page 2 now coming through on your screens as it refreshes. So bottom of page 2 heading on to page 3. In Matt's case, he's chosen to explain, bearing in mind his CV is actually a bit old now, but he's chosen to explain his second role, going back in time with Hayes as a senior manager, explaining who on earth Hayes are. Bit less information this time because it's less relevant, but explaining it a little bit more detailed still to give people some idea of what he's capable of. Then you'll notice earlier career about a third of the way down page 3 of the CV, so towards the bottom of your screen, earlier career box. Now you'll notice here that we've just abbreviated his earlier career. 1 line, dates, company, role. That's all you need to do. What he was getting up to at Enterprise Rent-A-Car is of no bearing to him getting an interview going forwards. However, although I've not detailed it because it's nothing to do with the legal profession, one of Matt's career highlights happens to be from Enterprise Rent-A-Car. So this reinforces my point. It's relevant, it's appropriate, it shows what capabilities he has. So he's chosen to pick something from his earlier career to highlight on page 1 of his CV. There's no harm in that. It's not dated on page 1. There's no reference to anything that makes it look old or ineffective. It's actually a very powerful case study. So you can do that. and that escapes that chronological barrier that I talked about earlier, where people feel that they have to stay constrained within the chronological order of events, and therefore their most impressive happening and achievement is on page 3 of their CV, which is a bit of a nonsense. So you can escape that. And then finally, the balance of page 3 of Matt's CV, you can see education, personal details, and the recommendations. It's just 2 people who will attest to Matt's ability. It can be really powerful if you've got them. Optional extra, we say, but if you've got them, use them, particularly if they can just be copied and pasted from LinkedIn, as long as they're appropriate and relevant, of course. If you had any particular technical skills or things that needed mentioning, you could create extra boxes to get the message across. So it is always, as ever, very bespoke to your own circumstances. Right. Very quickly, because we're done on the CV side, if you're interested in LinkedIn, and you ought to be if you're thinking about being active in the job market anytime soon, or building a profile now to help support you find a better, different, new job in the future, unless you've got some very specific reasons to why you wouldn't be on it, you probably ought to be on LinkedIn. Now, I'm not going to go into any detail about LinkedIn right now because we have a separate CILEx webinar running Wednesday, 26th of Feb. And if you bear with me, whilst I work my magic with a mouse, I've got a link which I'm going to paste into the toolbar facility so you can copy and use it, which will allow you to register. If you haven't already seen the invite from CILEx, it will allow you to register separately for the LinkedIn webinar. I'll just paste it a few times. And if you just zap that, it will allow you to register for the event. And what we're going to talk about there is all about how to use LinkedIn to build, again, a strong business case for you and promote your own interest to the wider world, but how you can use it to influence and network and make it work for you. Now, you don't have, that doesn't mean to say you have to be overly participative. That's not what it's about. It's not about spending half your life on a networking site. It's about how to make it work for you whilst you don't have to spend a great deal of time looking after it or tending it, which is one of the beauties of LinkedIn. You can just leave it as a personal website if you like, but it can still be a damn sight more effective than it might be right now. So by all means, welcome to join us for that session. I promised halfway through this to give you an offer on our services. So hopefully by now you'll have got a pretty good idea whether your CV is up to mark or not. You'll either have the proof because you've suffered the pain, or you'll have the proof because you're getting loads of interviews. But then hopefully you've still have got something out of this evening. But otherwise, happy days to those that are getting that level of high interviews. But for those that not, if you want to go off and do something yourself, obviously you can. You should be equipped now with at least 3 key things to do to help build this stronger business case for you. For those that are thinking, well, yeah, I need to do something, but I really don't want to do it myself, we've got a really good deal which we offer our CILEx members. And that is that the standard price for doing a CV and a LinkedIn profile, unfortunately, I mean, it's not an inconsiderable amount of money, but there's a lot of time that goes into sorting this. Standard price is $299 for the CV, 50 quid plus VAT for LinkedIn profile, so $349 plus VAT for both. And now, until close of play Monday, week today, we're discounting that to $275 plus VAT. So you get a brand new CV and a LinkedIn profile to complement it for a lot less, $275 plus VAT. Process lurking behind that, very briefly. You decide you want to progress. There's a link that you can use. Again, whilst I'm talking, I'll paste the actual link to that web page for those that are interested into the chat room facility. The process goes something like this. You say, I'm interested. Sign up via our website, the link for which I'm pasting now, and we then allocate you a writer. They speak with you. We send you some preparatory material. the CV writer talks with you, identifies what you're trying to do, and then arranges with you a telephone consultation or Skype or whatever. That can last up to 2 hours. There's no time limit, but typically it's a couple of hours where we extract all the relevant data from you, the raw data from you about what you're doing, you know, your value proposition, career highlights, notable cases, achievements, and what you've got to offer the world and what you're trying to do importantly and who that target audience may be. Validate that, write a new CV based on that information from the ground up. So it's not a tweak, it's not an amendment, it's a complete ground up rewrite. Work with you to make sure you're happy with it, and then affect the same result on your LinkedIn profile, and then you're good to go, and then you can get that out into the marketplace and make it work for you. Takes a couple of hours to do the telephone conversation, probably 4 to 5 hours to write the CV, so you can do the maths. The hourly rate's not that hideous. The only downside is it's time-limited offer because it is a big discount. So if you're interested in that, follow the link or give us a call, visit our website, and we can help. The first 10 people to place an order get something else as well. They get a free cover letter and access to an interview coaching package, which is an online tool, really useful. It allows you to practice your interview technique, to preset questions and record yourself. Now, you're the only person that gets to look at it, and you can sort of assess yourself and how you did, but it's a really useful tool for those that are maybe a bit weak on interview skills. So that goes to the first 10 people that order. If you fancy having a go yourself, over and above what I've told you this evening, again, using the same link that I gave you, that CILEx Feb 14 link, you can order via the website a pack, modestly priced, 15 quid plus VAT, so 18 quid, gets you some templates, a workbook, some interview help, and it gives you a better platform, I suppose, to do it yourself. If just during that process you still think, oh, I really can't be bothered, then I will obviously allow you to upgrade to the other package, and we'll do the work for you, and we'll discount the 18 quid. So you're no worse off. If you've got any other questions about the process that aren't resolvable via video by visiting our link, by all means give us a call, drop us a line, and we're more than happy to help and explain on any sort of case-by-case basis. So that's the end of the session as far as the presentation is concerned. Gone over a little bit on time, so I apologise for that. I hope you found it useful and that you got something from it. I promised that I'd take a look at any questions. So I'll just check. I don't think there were any that came through. So I'll hang on for a couple of minutes. If you want to ask any questions, just tap away into the GoToWebinar facility and I'll deal with them. In the meantime, for those that need to disappear, thank you very much for your time and attention. Much appreciated. Best of luck to you if we never speak with you again. But for those that need help, hopefully you've got either material to do something about it yourselves, or come visit us, call us, email us, visit that link. More than happy to help. As I say, I'll hang on now for another few seconds if you've got any questions, and then I'll be with you for the next few moments. Well, one thing I should mention for those that are just on still, if you want to view a copy of this, you'll get a link tomorrow morning giving you a link to the presentation if you want to review it again. Okay, but it looks like most people are leaving the building, so to speak, so I'll sign off now. Good night to the remainder of you. I'll be gone in about 5-10 seconds. I'll shut this thing down, and thanks for your time. Good night.